Hey, what's going on? It's Todd. Welcome back. Vlog number 10 today. I'll keep it short and sweet. I have some updates as far as the bankroll challenge goes. I'll put those right over here so you can see. Played an Aria session a couple days ago, 2-5, and being back in Vegas means we get some table footage. So with that said, let's hit the felt. The session starts off pretty slowly, and it takes us quite a while to get into an interesting hand, which is actually pretty typical. Let's run through a few of those lowlights so you can get an accurate picture of how the day's been going so far. I open hijack to 15 with pocket sixes, and both blinds decide to come along. We don't get the best flop in the world with Queen 10-3 two-tone. I don't think betting would accomplish much against two opponents, considering how bad most turns and rivers will be for our exact hand, so I end up checking all the way down, attempting to make it to showdown, and we end up losing to the big blind, who rivered a 9 on us. Next, I open to 15 with King 10 suited in early position and get a couple of callers. We flop top 2, and this is another draw-heavy board, so I size up to 30 and take it down. I open from middle position with pocket 5s to 15. The low jack puts in the 3-bet to 45. The hijack cold calls, and for this price, I think we can set mine even though we're out of position, so I come along. We end up whiffing the flop and folding. We see an open to 20 from the player in early position, and the player to his immediate left makes the call. I look down at 10-9 suited in the hijack and decide to attack the dead money a little bit and put the original aggressor in a tough spot, so I put in the 3-bet to 80. Surprisingly, both players call, so we're looking for some improvement, and unfortunately, that's not what we get. We completely whiff, missing diamonds and any real straight potential, so this is just going to be a give up against two opponents. I check the flop and end up folding to a bet on the turn. And one more low light, I open ace-queen for middle position and get a call from two players to my left. We see a connected 6-high board, which is just not going to be favoring our opening range, so I elect to take the showdown value and check, and it ends up checking through. The turn puts 4 to a straight on board, and there's just nothing we're going to be doing here but checking, and when there's a bet, we fold. And with that, you are now up to speed on the first 3 hours of this session. And we finally pick up a hand that's interesting and worth going over in detail. We see an open to 15 from the player in middle position and a call from the low jack. I look down at ace-4 suited in the big blind, and I think this is a hand that can go either way between raising and calling, but at the moment I don't think my table image is the greatest in the world, so rather than completely randomizing between the two, I actually decide to take the passive line because my image is so bad. The flop is ace-queen 10 with 2 hearts and a club, giving us a relatively weak top pair and a backdoor flush draw, and I check it over. The original aggressor checks behind, and we see a bet of 35 from the player in the low jack. I don't see any reason to raise on this coordinated board texture, but folding seems pretty nitty, considering our backdoor potential, so I land on the only remaining option and make the call, and the original aggressor in middle position folds. We pick up some equity on the turn with the deuce of clubs and check it over once again. This time our opponent bets full pot for 120. Not the most comfortable spot in the world, but again, folding seems way too nitty with our nut draw. We're not getting the best price in the world, but given our stack depth, I think we can make up for this poor price on the river if we do complete our flush, so I put in the call one more time. We end up missing our flush, but we pick up trips when the ace of diamonds rolls off on the river. I check it over one more time, and the low jack continues piling, betting the full amount of the pot once again. We have a decision, so let's think this through. It's reasonable to assume we'll never be up against pocket queens because he didn't 3-bet pre-flop. There are 3 combos of pocket 10s available, one remaining combo of ace-queen suited in the ace-queen of spades. The same goes for ace-10. Obviously, the offsuit combos of each of those could still be in play, and he could always have king-jack. I highly doubt he's calling a pre-flop raise with ace-10 or king-jack offsuit, and I feel like he'd want to 3-bet a decent amount of the ace-queen combos too, so with all that in mind, we're really only losing to a few hands. The problem is, I can't find a ton of hands that he would play this way as a bluff, and this betting line is insanely strong. I tank for a while, and eventually decide to put in the chips, and unfortunately for us, he ends up showing one of those hands, which is 10s full of aces. Unfortunate river card for us, and a pretty easy fold if we don't make trips on the end, but I think the takeaway here is that this betting line of pot is going to be super underbluffed, and I should have found the fold on this river. Anyways, time to top back up and move on. We're now into the game for 1800 total, and go back to a string of whiffed flops for the next 45 minutes before this next one. There's a limp from the player in early position, a raise from the cutoff to 15, and the small blind calls. We're in the big blind with king-queen offsuit, and given the configuration, I think this is a great candidate to attack the dead money, so I put in the 3-bet to 75, and the player in the cutoff makes the call. The flop is 7-5-5 with a couple of spades, so we don't really flop much of anything. But we do have some range advantage, and this board shouldn't connect with the cutoff very often. I like to bet tiny for a quarter pot with the intention of continuing to apply pressure if the turn is a spade or a Broadway card, but luckily it doesn't come to that, and he just lets it go. Next, we pick up the best possible hand to assist us on this long journey out of the hole in pocket aces, and open the action to 15 from the hijack, and the button decides that he would like to play for a little bit more. He raises to 50. You love to see it. Folds back to us, and we have a mandatory 4-bet out of position, so I put in another raise to 150, and without much thought, he puts in the call. The flop is 7-5-3 rainbow, and with an SPR of a little over 3, I decide in the moment to try and play a 2-street game, and I bet 175 to try and get it in on the turn, but unfortunately, he does not like that price, and he lets it go. After going over this session with my coach, this is a pretty clear mistake on my part, and I think it's better to just go for all 3 streets by betting smaller. He shouldn't ever have a set here, but when I bet so big, he's probably going to be folding his 9s through jacks, and we would really rather keep getting value from those hands, so not super happy about this one. By the way, if you're enjoying the session and reviews so far, don't forget to like the video and consider subscribing so you don't miss out on the future sessions. Also, if you'd like to connect with me, my coach, and other like-minded poker friends, you can find the invite link to my Discord server in the pinned comment below. Following this hand, I go on a nice little run of premiums. I open King 10 suited in the cutoff and flop bottom pair, but decide to let it go on the turn. We see an open from early position and a call from the cutoff before looking down at aces again in the big blind. We 3-bet, get a caller, and take it down with a small c-bet on the flop. There's a limp from the low jack, and I raise ace-queen of spades in the cutoff, and he puts in the call. Then he leads into me on a flop of king 6-6, and even though I could probably fight for this one, I just decide to look for a better spot and let it go. I'm dealt ace-queen of diamonds on the button and play a hand against the small blind. I flop middle pair and decide to check. He bets 20 on the turn, and I call. And when he checks the river, I go ahead and decide to just check behind, and we end up beating a worse queen. Definitely lost some value by not betting the river myself, but it happens. And that leads us into this next one, where I am first to act and look down at pocket kings. I open the action to 15, and we get a call from the player in middle position, the cutoff, and the button. So we'll need to navigate this one out of position 4 ways. The flop is 9-5-4 with a couple of spades, and this isn't the best board for our range, so because our hand doesn't need a ton of protection, we're holding the king of spades, and we have so many opponents, I decide to check, and it checks to the button, who bets 30. I think a check raise would be an overplay at this stage, so I elect to call, and the other 2 players get out of the way. The turn pairs the bottom card and brings in a second flush draw, and I decide to check it over one more time to let him continue firing with his pairs and his flush draws. He continues betting for 65, and I think it's best to spring the trap now that we're heads up, and our hand strength is relatively disguised, so I check raise to 200, and he goes into the tank. He thinks it over for a full minute, and looks relatively uncomfortable in the process before he ultimately decides to let it go, and we take another one down. Next up, we open king-queen suited on the button to 15 and get called by both blinds. The flop is ace-5 deuce rainbow with a heart, and I don't see a good reason to bet here. We have a lot of showdown value with the best unpaired hand, and because we're the button, we don't necessarily have a lot of ace-x holdings in range, so for those reasons, I land on a check. We pick up some equity on the turn with the 4 of hearts, and the blinds check again. We still have a ton of showdown value, and now that any 3 makes a straight, I still don't think betting makes a ton of sense because I'd hate to put in a bet and get blown off the hand by a check raise, so I decide to check one more time. The river is the jack of hearts, so we wind up with the second nuts, and the small blind decides to bet 30. The big blind folds, and we have a mandatory raise here. In the moment, I decide that a wheel can still call a sizing of around 110, so that's what I make it, and I'll just let him take it over from here.
Backdoor to flush. backdoor death row.
Brent, the 1-2-0, Brent.
You don't have 3-6. Of course you do. Listen.
Obviously happy to get the call, and we are continuing to work our way out of this hole. This next one is a doozy, but I was in the middle of typing out another hand, so rather than scrambling to set up my phone and give any information away, I just played the hand without filming. The cutoff opens to 20, and we look down at Jack 10 offsuit in the big blind. For this price, it's probably just a fold, but I get a little sticky and decide to defend this one. The flop is Ace Queen 8 with 2 diamonds. We flop a double gutter. I check to the pre-flop raiser, and he bets 20. We might actually get away with check raising as a semi-bluff with a diamond in our hand here, but I decide to just call, and we end up getting there on the turn with the 9 of spades. No reason to lead here, so I check once again, and he bets 30 this time, which is relatively small. So with the nuts, I think it's a mandatory check raise and bump it up to 110. He thinks it over for about a minute before putting in a surprise 3-bet for 280. I double check my hand just to make sure I'm not getting free rolled by Jack 10 of diamonds and decide to see if he wants to play for all of it, and I raise it one more time to the tune of all in. He goes deep into the tank for at least a couple of minutes and looks incredibly uncomfortable before ultimately deciding to let it go. And for the first time of the session, we are finally in the black. A whole whopping $35. Let's go. We see an open to 15 from the player in the low jack, and I look down at Ace 5 suited in the big blind. Like Ace 4, this hand can go either way between raising and calling, but since we're already heads up, I actually decide to flat again this time. The flop is Ace 9-7 with 2 hearts and a club. We flop top pair and a backdoor flush draw. I check it over to the aggressor, and he puts in a continuation bet of 15. Raising seems a little ambitious, so I make the call. We improve to 2 pair on the turn, but it does complete the front door flush, so I check it over one more time, and he decides to check it back this time. The river is the queen of spades, and this is a spot where it's appropriate to go for some thin value, and I bet 45. Unfortunately, he lets it go, and we take down another small pot, adding to our win. In this next one, the action player at the table opens the action to 15 from the low jack. It gets to us in the cutoff, and I decide to come along with Ace Deuce of Hearts. The button comes along, and so do both of the players in the blinds. 5 ways to a flop of King 7-3 Rainbow with a heart, so we flop a couple of backdoors, and fortunately, the action checks through. The turn is the Deuce of Diamonds, and when it checks to us, I still don't think we have a reason to bet, so I go ahead and check one more time, and the button checks as well. The river is the Deuce of Spades, so we do improve to trips, and the original aggressor now bets 60 into 75. This is another one of those mandatory raises, given the way this hand is played out, so I raise the price of poker to 200, and unfortunately no one wants to pay us off, so we take another decent pot down. And with that, we have made it to the final hand of the evening. The straddle is on, and I look down at Ace-King suited in the hijack. I open the action to 35, which is a little bit larger than my normal sizing, but this straddler in particular has been defending almost every hand he's been dealt in the straddle or the big blind, so I think the sizing is okay. And that's what he does, he defends. The flop is Queen-Queen-9 two-tone. We flop 2 overs and a backdoor flush draw. He checks it over to us, and we could probably deny some equity to 2 random cards and his drawing hands with a bet, but I decide to take the showdown value and check it. We improve on the turn with the ace of clubs, and when he checks it over, I think it's appropriate to go for some value. Bet a little over half pot, and unfortunately, he lets it go. And that's going to do it for us today. Not a ton of interesting hands, but that's just the way it goes sometimes. I hope you enjoyed them. Thank you for sticking around to the end, and have a great rest of your day. So that's going to wrap it up for us today. After all of that, 9.5 hours of play, we ended up winning $100 on the dot. I think we were in for a little over $1,800, cashed out for $100 more than whatever it was. If you enjoyed the content, please let me know in the comments and maybe consider subscribing. Also, if you want to join the online community that we're trying to build here, go over some hand histories, talk poker, join the Discord. I've got that linked down in the comments in a pinned comment. Please consider doing that, and I'd love to hear from you, give you hand feedback, and grow grow together. So thank you so much, and I'll catch you next time.